Recognize my very good friend from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, I thank the chairman and thank the witnesses, the chairman and the ranking members, for joining us today on such short notice. I do think context as to why the Rules Committee is meeting this afternoon is important. For those poor souls who may be watching this hearing on C-SPAN and assuming that the House is in fact in session, it's important to disabuse them of that notion. The House is not in session today. Why is the House not in session? Because the Speaker sent everyone home for the weekend, 7 days before the government is slated to shut down. I'll seek unanimous consent a little bit later in my remarks to enter into the record an article from Politico this morning. I was reading the headline, "More House rule votes have failed this week than in the past 2 decades." Just think about that. More House rules have failed in the last 5 days than in the last 20 years in the House of Representatives. That is House Republican control. Dysfunction. Now, most Americans might wonder, how did we get here? And I suppose, what legislative strategy has the House Republican caucus devised or developed to avoid a government shutdown? Apparently, that strategy is waste an entire summer debating bills on protecting gas stoves and the like, wait 8 days before government funding runs out, and then bring before this committee and the full House a series of partisan bills that stand no chance of passing in the Senate, much less being signed into law by the president. That's why we're here. And yeah, I think I heard someone, one of your colleagues, Republican colleague, I don't know if the microphone caught it, I believe he said he's not that wrong about it, right? Is that what you said? Mr. Ogles will have a chance to testify. Maybe perhaps he can confirm whether or not my summation of the events of the past 4 months is accurate. I suspect some of my Republican colleagues will be intellectually candid and honest about it in saying that that's true, that my description of the last 3 months under Republican control is accurate. It's unfortunate because there are Border Patrol agents and members of our armed forces, federal government employees across our country who are wondering whether or not they will get a paycheck in 8 days, whether or not the Republican caucus will get their act together so that the government can remain open and running. And so, I have great respect for my colleagues who are testifying today, and I hope they understand that as I ask a series of questions, because I do think the American people deserve answers as to why the Republican caucus has decided to engineer a government shutdown. And so, Mr. Joyce, Chairman Joyce, and I know you to be a reasonable member, and certainly by reputation, and you have a great working relationship, I understand, with my colleague from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, your ranking member on your subcommittee. Well, let me take a step back. I take it you would describe the situation on our southern border as urgent?
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think you'd be alone in that view. When did the Homeland Security Subcommittee hold hearings on this bill that we're considering today? My understanding is you held a lot of hearings.
Right, and I believe we passed it in the full committee in July.
You passed it, would June 21st of this year sound about right? That the full committee marked up your bill?
I'll defer to you, sir, if
Yeah.
you have the date there. I know that I've been working on it since the day I was appointed as chairman with my dear friend Henry Cuellar to try to find better ways to make implement a strategy to contain what's happening at the border, because it's a national shame.
And I, for one, want to say I appreciate your commitment. The question I have is, why has it taken 100 days for the Homeland Security Subcommittee and the full Appropriations Committee to bring this bill to the Rules Committee, if the situation on the southern border is as urgent as you and I both believe it is?
Well, I certainly agree that if I was, running this place, I prioritize things perhaps in a different way, but
Aren't you running the place? Who is in charge?
Well,
Do I talk to the Republican whip? Do I talk to Speaker McCarthy? Who do I ask this question of?
well, the appropriations process normally takes place during, we have our field hearings throughout the first 6 months of the year.
Sure.
July, generally, as we have processed 10 of our 12 bills. The other 2 should get done shortly.
You did your work. June 21st, you marked up the bill. June 21st was 100 days ago.
Correct.
All I'm trying to ask is what happened in this intervening 100 days? Why didn't we take up this bill last month? Or maybe in July? I don't understand.
I've been ready to go on June 22nd, sir, but I don't dictate the schedule.
Do you understand why the American people would be frustrated as they see a Republican caucus that purports and states that the situation on our southern border is urgent, but waits 100 days to bring a Homeland Security funding bill to the House floor? Would that make sense
May
to
I
you?
respond, sir?
Yeah, of course, yes, sir.
Yeah, no, because I think the American people are completely frustrated because, if you look at it, I remember, I think it was my dear friend Mario Diaz-Balart, who had presidents of the countries he's talked about before, who came here in 14 and 15, who said, we want our children. We want them to stay home. We wish the president at that time, President Obama, would say, you're not welcome here. And when he did that, when he started deporting people and pushing back on the entry, guess what? The numbers went down, and they stayed down. But this administration, from day one, has said there's a green light here. Please come. Now talking about giving Venezuelans cards and wish they could work in this country and stay in this country, and they don't care whether or not these people are coming across the border. You can't call what's happening down there Christian. You cannot call it humane. The journey these people are taking to come to freedom is not fair to anyone, and the American people are having to pay for it.
And I can tell your passion. And again, as I said, Mr. Joyce, Mr. Chairman, I understand your passion, I understand your commitment, and I understand that your subcommittee did its job working with Mr. Cuellar, holding a series of hearings earlier this year, and the Appropriations Committee. I have substantive disagreements, which we'll go through with respect to this particular bill, but the committee marked up the bill. And my point that I'm simply trying to better understand, I suppose, or the question that I am trying to reconcile in my mind, is why the House Republican majority decided to spend the summer on bills regarding gas stoves and the lesser prairie chicken, and then send everyone home for a 47-day recess, only to come back and 7 days before the government is slated to shut down and troops and Border Patrol agents are slated to not receive paychecks, decide that now they'd like to bring this bill to the floor. That is my point, your answer in the very beginning was a candid one, that, I should talk to who's running the place, and that clearly is the Speaker and the Republican leadership. So I suppose, I don't know that they testify in front of this committee, so maybe I'll be waiting, and the American people will be waiting on an answer. You said, Mr. Joyce, in a recent interview, September 11th this year, in Forbes magazine, I think I got the quote right, you said, if we get close to September 30th, but we're making good headway on these things, a short continuing resolution, and that was in brackets, and the reporters, presuming that's what you're referring to, may be in line. And I suspect I'm not asking you to verify the veracity of that quote. I talked to a lot of reporters, but what I am curious as to whether or not you still hold that view. And perhaps maybe a finer point on it. How close is close enough to September 30th? Is 8 days close enough? Is 7 days close enough? Is 5 days close? At what point will the House Republican caucus say, you know what, we're close enough to the government shutting down and costing billions of dollars to the American economy, maybe doing a short-term CR on a bipartisan basis isn't a bad idea? Because it seems like you might be there with me on that front. And what I'm looking for, and I think what a lot of my colleagues on this side of the aisle are looking for, are governing partners, are just people who might have completely different ideological views, but are not interested in seeing this place, as the Speaker, I think, said in response to a question 2 days ago, burned down. I mean, that's what I'm asking.
I understand and appreciate your question, sir. I made that statement because I do believe that negotiations back and forth between our members, 435 of us, members of this House, taking place that is moving the ball forward, in other words, addressing these concerns on bills like this to get our spending priorities in order, is something that deserves the time it takes to get that done. If we are approaching, like today, we have some bills are coming up. Next week, we'll have some more bills coming before this committee and hopefully getting to the floor. If there's a short period of time, but we're making striving to get our work done, I think a CR is in order to get to the next set of bills so we can put together, for once and for all, for the American people, 12 appropriation bills set at a finite number in which we can all administer this government and carry out the duties of this government in a way that functions. We haven't done that in a long time. And pass them in the House, pass them in the Senate, have the president sign it. And I'm always been a big fan of that. I think, and you might even, if you checked in that same article, might say that I've said that people here should get an Approps 101 when they get here. I had the luxury of having something like Chairman Cole, at that time, being able to take me by the arm, if you will, and guide me through this process. And it's important. It's a long, involved process to come up with these bills that takes a hell of a lot of time and work. And the American people deserve to know that we're getting that work done. So if it takes a short-term CR to get to that end result, God bless.
I hear you, and I guess the question that I suppose many Americans are asking, and certainly I am, is why risk it? Why risk Border Patrol agents and our armed forces not getting paid? Why not do the CR? We're 7 days away. I mean, the sentiment I glean from your answer to that reporter, again, is a reasonable sentiment. The notion that, hey, listen, we get close to that September 30th date, it's not in the best interest of the country to allow the government to shut down. So let's do a CR as we've done in the past, and then get back to regular order. And I don't understand why, when that, I believe, is actually the view shared by certainly a majority of members of the House of Representatives, not a majority, I suppose, of the caucus, but perhaps yourself and perhaps others, why we can't proceed on that basis. But I appreciate your candor, and let me yield a moment to the ranking member, of course, of the full committee, Mr. Lauro.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chairman. If I might excuse myself, I have a train to catch very shortly, but if I can, I had the real exceptional opportunity for the last 2 years in chairing the committee of making sure that with both Democrats and Republicans, as you well know, and some of my colleagues know, that we came together last December, and it was in the hands of the appropriators on both sides of the aisle that we hammered out the bills, and we compromised. No one got everything that they wanted, and we were able to, we passed a CR in December, and we need to do a CR for several weeks. As my colleagues all know on appropriations, it takes us a length of time to put the bills together, and then we can hammer out what the differences are. That is all. I'm ready to sit down anytime, any place, anywhere, to be able to begin this process. It is because what is contained in the 12 appropriations bills is every service, every resource that the American people, whether it is a lie heap, whether it is education, whether it is transportation, where it is national security, resides. We are the only place in which all of this resides. So if we can sit down and begin to hammer out the compromise where we need to go forward, that's where we need to go. And I just say, I'm happy at any time. I have to leave, but answer any questions as to any of this, Mr.
Before the
Chairman.
gentlelady leaves, and we understand you have a pressing engagement, does anybody have any questions for the gentlelady? No. Not, number one, thank you for making the effort to be here, and the gentlelady's excused.
Thank you so much.
And I have a few more questions for...
You still have the time.
I appreciate the chairman. And
I
again,
thank the gentleman for yielding.
of course, and I thank the ranking member again for her service, and wish her safe travels. I do have a couple of substantive questions on both of the bills. First, Chairman Diaz-Balart, I want to ask a couple of questions about the State Ops Appropriations Bill. You made a comment in your opening, which I agree with, about the need for the United States to, I don't want to misquote you, but essentially getting serious about countering China. And what I am curious about, there are a number of decisions that the Appropriations Committee and your subcommittee have made with respect to how you are prioritizing a variety of different programs. within the State Department and operated by the State Department that I, respectfully disagree with. Just by way of example, do you know who is the continent of Africa's largest trading partner today?
It's probably very safe to say that it's China.
It's China.
Yep.
Right. This budget cuts the U.S. African Development Foundation $30 billion, $15 million below 2023. And I guess what I'm wondering is how you make the case that that entity, which obviously serves a critical role in fostering that trade relationship, your broader point, which I assume you agree with, is that we don't want to cede the international stage to China. And so, given that they are the largest trading partner with the continent of Africa, how do you bridge that gap there?
If I may?
Of course.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for, I think, a very important question. And so, and you're right, it's a dangerous world. And I think it's a much more dangerous world, particularly after the fiasco in Afghanistan. So it is a dangerous world. And so, as I mentioned, and you're right, in my opening statement, we have made some tactical decisions. Cutting funding for either agencies that we found to not be very efficient or very effective, and then prioritize focused on specifically the issues that I mentioned, including confronting China. We designate $3.4 billion diplomatic engagement and foreign assistance programs and activities in support of the global Indo-Pacific strategy, again, countering China. We provide an additional, as I mentioned, $1 billion to advance the United States' national security interests in the Indo-Pacific. Again, $1 billion more than President Biden did. So I think it is a very good conversation, discussion to figure out, what can we do even more. But I will tell you, if you're concerned about what we're doing in this bill, which is a lot stronger, with a lot less overall money than the president, then that's a conversation that we should also probably have with him. This bill does a lot more to counter China than the president could do while he is trying to spend a lot more money. And if you would allow me, sir, one of the things, and I mentioned it not to be a jerk, but one of the things that caught me off guard is in the press release, this is not by some individual member out there, this is the leadership of the Appropriation Committee, the Democratic leadership, actually criticizes my bill for cutting funds, including that go directly either to the Communist Party of China, et cetera, which we are doing. And so, yeah, we are re-emphasizing,
I'm just asking
reshifting.
about Africa. I don't know what.
But everywhere, including, we are actually shifting, taking money out of things that are not as effective, not as strong, to particularly do exactly what you were saying, which is emphasizing, attacking, not attacking, confronting, I should say. Thank you.
And I understand the argument. And by the way, there's a broader debate, right? I think some of our colleagues might take the view or the position that none of these investments are necessary, right? And that perhaps the efficacy of those programs, or just more broadly, ideologically, believe that that's not something that the United States should be pursuing. I don't think that's your argument, is my sense. Let me frame it a different way. South America's largest trading partner
As well.
is China, right? That concerns you, right? I assume?
Yes, sir.
Right? And you don't believe that's in the best interest of the United States.
Correct.
Right? And so the point I'm trying to make, this budget that you've submitted, it cuts, just another example, the Inter-American Foundation $24.5 million below 2023 levels, right? That foundation, obviously, again, similar to the Africa Development Commission that I mentioned, designed to foster trade relations. So if you are concerned, as I am, about countering China, and you are concerned, as I am, about China becoming the largest trading partner for South America, explain to me the reasoning behind cutting the very program that is designed to mitigate against that.
Yeah. And again, I thank you for your question and for your interest. I think we all know that there's a lot of duplication of effort, and there's a lot of wasted money, unfortunately. So what we have done is precisely focus on those things that we can show are the most effective. And yes, we are shaving in some cases, and in some cases, basically defunding in areas that frankly cannot show results, which is what I mentioned, for example. It's hard to believe. And I have to admit, I was shocked when we saw that there was money going to, for example, to pay back loans in some of these lending institutions that get U.S. taxpayer money, that go abroad. Then some of these countries were using those funds to pay back loans that they owed China. That is the kind of thing that, and by the way, I look forward to continuing working with you, because I think we're on the same page as far, again, if I may be so bold, I think we both agree that China is a serious threat, right? So I think we're on the same page there. The question is, I think you would also agree that assuming that every dollar in every institution that we're funding is necessarily effective, it is not. What we have done with a scalpel is look at where areas that, frankly, that are not being that effective, areas that are duplicative, areas that are wasteful, precisely to then confront China. And I think it is very clear that with a lot less money, we're doing a lot more to confront China, and I would argue in a lot of other areas. But I'm grateful for your interest in an area which I think is, frankly, a primary area of national security.
I appreciate the colloquy, and I certainly support a number of the investments that you identified within the broader bill in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy in particular. And I guess I'll close with this with respect to your particular bill, and I have one more question for Mr. Joyce. The broader concern I think I have is if, as I said, we're all committed to this goal of countering China, in my mind, cutting the budgets of these various programs that are designed to ensure that China does not continue to serve as the largest trading partner in Latin America, or that China does not continue to serve as the largest trading partner for the continent of Africa. Embassies, right? I mean, you know this, of course, as the chairman. China has far more embassies than we do. They have most embassies of any country on the planet. I don't really understand the national security imperative in terms of, given that desire to counter China, of cutting the embassy investments here within this budget. And so that's the piece of this that I'm trying to reconcile. But I understand your argument. And I wouldn't disagree, by the way, perhaps we can have a conversation offline with various efforts that you might take to reform the programs to the extent that programs aren't working as well as they should, rather than zeroing them out entirely. So that, anyway, I'll leave it there. Mr. Joyce, the only question I have with respect to the underlying budget, and perhaps, Mr. Cuellar, you can expound on a bit of this as well. I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So from what I gleaned from the text, the budget bill cuts by $232 million requested funding to combat terrorism and cybersecurity. And my understanding is that Mr. Cuellar introduced an amendment during the full committee markup to essentially reverse that cut. Is that right? And if so, can you help us understand the reasoning behind that amendment failing?
Thank you. The reason we're cutting in different areas, and as a whole, I believe we've cut about $3 billion in spending, similar to Chairman Diaz-Balart, focused on those programs that actually work and concentrated our money there. So we're moving it around in different ways to make it work. And I understand and appreciate where my dear friend, the ranking member, was coming from. And I understand that there's important opportunities there to make sure that we secure our cyberspace, because it's something that we're getting attacked on a daily basis, not only by rogue nations, but by rogue international players. And it's something that we want to invest in a more comprehensive effort, but we also want to see results for the investments that we're making to keep our cyberspace secure.
Thank you. And Mr. Cuellar, if you care to... I think your amendment was to, as I understand it here, to mitigate the threat. It would have funded CBP, $691 million to mitigate against the threats of cybersecurity and terrorism, which was the request that CBP had made and which was not included in the mark. I hope I'm
And that is
capturing that
correct. Mr. Neguse, it was not included, and I'm hoping that the committee will make my amendment in order, at least have that debate on the floor and see what happens. All I'm saying is taking money away from the border wall and put it into a more targeted area where we can look at cybersecurity, where we can put more money for technology at the ports of entry, because most of the time, some folks think that most of the drugs that come into the U.S. actually, they think it comes in between ports, but 90 to 94% of the meth, cocaine, fentanyl will come through ports of entry. And that's what we need to do a lot more. I know we added more money there, but we need to do a lot more to target there. And I still say, extend the perimeter out. I know some of y'all feel that the wall is the best way, and you say that it's the experts, but I do want to remind you that if you look at the Border Patrol Union 10 years ago, they thought the wall was an ineffective waste of dollars itself. I've asked every Border Patrol chief from Obama to from Bush, Obama, Trump, including Trump's Border Patrol chief, and asked them, how much time does a wall buy you, a fence buy you? All of them have said, quote, from a few seconds to a few minutes, depending who wants to cross it. So again, I think there are more targeted ways of putting money at the ports of entry and the checkpoints, Border Patrol checkpoints. So that's where most of the drugs are coming. In fact, 86 to 87% of the people that are stopped with drugs are U.S. citizens, not the migrants, and they're stopped at the Border Patrol checkpoints at the ports of entry. So we all want to secure the border. We just want to find the more efficient, effective way to doing that. Thank you, Mr. Neguse.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and as evidenced by your answer, I misspoke with respect to cyber drug interdiction is what I was meant to reference. So in any event, with that, again, I would say thank you to the witnesses, recognizing that you came here on very short notice and understanding the unique circumstances of this particular hearing, and I'll yield back to the chairman.